What it do? Yo man, listen. Today I have a very special video for you. I have a interview with Snowprint regarding tacticus. Let's get right into it. Just for a little bit of context, this interview was supposed to come out early January. However, as you may know, I got extremely sick. I got sent to the hospital. I couldn't talk, so I couldn't do the interview. However, thankfully, Ratatosk was extremely generous and provided the answers to my questions in written form. So, unfortunately, this video is not going to have a Snowprint developer talk to me. However, I will be able to go over their answers. Just for a little bit of structure, I will read my question, then I will read the answer to the question. I will follow this up with giving my thoughts about the answers given and if I disagree or agree with them. Just a little note, I have been destroying my voice with making videos, so I do apologize if I take a little pause. That's to just mostly drink water. I hope you can understand. So the first question, it's a big one. I ask, why do Chaos buffers only buff Chaos, whereas Xenos and Imperium buffers buff everybody with an additional bonus to their own faction? The answer they gave has two parts. It says, this is for two reasons that fitted together. One, to establish Chaos as the otherworldly evil force it is in the lore. It is the reason other factions create desperate alliances. It is not part of those alliances, which makes sense. In lore, Chaos often does not ally with Imperium or Xenos. There are a handful of times where it happens. However, compared to how often Xenos and Imperium ally, it is very insignificant. 2. For balancing. While we want a lot of open-endedness of how you can combine characters into a team, allowing everybody with everybody to full effect will lead to some combinations being the best everywhere, making the game stale. Some build pockets are important to increase variety for us, to adjust balance in the future without shaking up the entirety of the character roster. Choosing Chaos worked here, since we needed the arguably equally evil Xenos factions to work somewhat together as a grander Xenos alliance for Tacticus' structure. Imperium is the entry point for players, also for many from the lore perspective. This is true. It's an undeniable fact that a lot of current 40k players got into 40k through Space Marine 1, Space Marine 2, and the Astartes web series. Alliance with... Okay, what am I saying? Oh yeah, and the alliance with the most factions in lore, on tabletop too. Imperium has a lot of factions, so we wanted it to be the most flexible for combinations. As for my thoughts, it does make a lot of sense. Personally, I would have liked it if Chaos could buff other characters, other factions, because it will lead to more variety. Personally, I do kind of disagree with the notion that some combinations being the best everywhere, making the game stale. Because we already have the Exo comp, which has made the game stale for a year. It is what it is. However, I understand where Snowprint is coming from. I do wonder how Drukhari will be in Tacticus, because they aren't the nicest people in the lore when it comes to teaming up with other factions. It's often a monkey's paw situation where, let's team up with Drukhari, and then you're like, oh no, I absolutely regret teaming up with Drukhari. Second question. When converting a character from 40k to Tacticus, what is the process of doing so? Do you look at the tabletop rules, and if you do you look at the current editions only, or do you look at the 9th and 8th editions? For converting a character's gameplay, we do, of course, look at the tabletop rules. Those rules change roughly every 3 years, right? That's how long an edition lasts. Though we are now in the 3rd Chaos Space Marine Codex since Tacticus' inception. I don't know about that. I guess it's true, because Chaos Space Marines did get their Codex very late in 9th edition. Therefore, our focus is to capture the essence of a character. If possible, we look back at several editions of a Codex rules as well as into books and series to try to find the themes and rules which are recurring. Karn the Betrayer is an excellent example of this. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that Karn, in my opinion, is the single best designed character in Tacticus in relation to how it is on the tabletop. We also consult with Games Workshop on how they plan to bring the character to the future of the IP. Sometimes they want to move away from some older references. That said, it will eventually happen that some Tacticus characters don't match perfectly with some future Codex rules anymore. Before I give my thoughts, I do want to say that consulting Games Workshop does make a lot of sense. For example, the character of Asmodai. It wouldn't make a lot of sense if Asmodai had a ranged psychic attack in Tacticus, and it's just not be the case on tabletop. So it does make sense that Games Workshop wants characters to match somewhat to tabletop. There are certain things, I do want to focus on the last statement where eventually happen that some Tacticus characters don't match perfectly with some feature of Codex rules anymore. There are a few things. So for example, currently on the lore and the index, Commissar Yerrick is missing in action. We don't know where he is. It is assumed that he got killed by Angron. It's not confirmed. Similar with Creed. Creed actually got pokeballed by... goodness, I'm blanking on his name. It's the Necron character that just collects everything. So currently, we can play with the daughter, Ursula Creed. She has her own model. She's pretty good. She has good rules. However, in Tacticus, we got the base Creed, whereas on tabletop, we have the daughter. Additionally, on Tacticus, Revas is a crisis battle suit, and her passive ability is a cyclic ion blaster. Cyclic ion blasters got phased out. Crisis battle suits got separated into 3 different data sheets, none of which have the cyclic ion blaster weapon option. So this thing is actually happening right now. My third question, or whatever, I lost count. Because of the nature of buffing in Tacticus, characters live and die by how many hits they have. How do you determine how many hits characters will have? Jain is the one I'm thinking of when I ask that. On tabletop, she has 12 attacks with her sweep profile and 6 attacks with her strike profile. But in Tacticus, she only has 3 hits. The answer given is we think there are multiple interesting ways to buff characters, especially if you not only look at guild rates. This is a little bit of a meta commentary because I exclusively look at guild rates. I see the shots taken. I respect this. The number of hits is mostly determined by balancing factors of what the role of the character should be and how it should synergize with others. When we can match the tabletop profile, that is nice, but since that profile is also changing roughly every 3 years, it is not our priority. 2 things about this. One, I think the second point is extremely weak, and I will explain why. However, the initial point, where it says the number of hits is mostly determined by balancing factors of what the role of the character should be and how it should synergize with others, this makes a lot of sense. So, what do I mean by this? In 9th and 10th editions, Jain has had a bucket of hits. The 10th edition datasheet has 6 hits for her strike profile, which is okay, and she has 12 hits for her Blade of Destruction sweep profile. In the 9th edition, I think she had 6 attacks base, and piercing strikes used the attack stat, whereas the sweeping blows used the 2 hit rolls instead of 1 for the attack stat, which resulted in 12 attacks. Now, in 7th edition, or 8th edition, sorry, she did have only 4 attacks. So one could make the argument that, oh, they use the 4th edition stats, which I disagree with, because the 4th edition Eldar Codex came out in 2017. Jain has had a bucket of hits as her identity for close to 4 or 5 years. However, the first point is, I think, where it makes a lot of sense. I do think perhaps Jain was given only 3 hits, because if she had 6 hits, the fact that Eldarion gave Eldar additional buffs would have pushed her over the edge. She would be very strong. So personally, I choose to believe that is the main reason. I often argue that factions with codexes/indexes are more likely to come to Tacticus than factions who have neither, based on how popular some codexless Space Marine factions are. Is that actually the case? So, I think this is a very important answer. I genuinely believe this question and the answer given is the most important in this Q&A. The answer is yes. Our priority is to bring in all the factions that have a codex, with the exception of Imperial and Chaos Knights, since they are not suitable for playable characters. We know that some sub-factions, like the additional Space Marine chapters, also have a large number of fans, but doing one of them means doing all of them. So we are still thinking about how to best represent them. This is very interesting. Just to clarify, Space Marine chapters divide into 2. One, which are the non-Codex compliant chapters. These are your Blood Angels, your Space Wolves, your Black Templars. They actually have codexes of their own, whereas factions such as Salamanders and Imperial Fists and whatnot, they don't have a codex of their own, which means they are Codex compliant chapters. Codex compliant mean complying to the Codex Astartes or whatever, the Space Marine Codex, the base Space Marine Codex. Large number, okay, sure. Now, I think it's good to get confirmation, because I've been shouting this from the mountaintops for a while. I kept saying, hey, I understand a lot of people love word bearers, night lords and whatnots, but we are not going to get them until we complete every faction with a codex. And I do feel vindicated that that's the case. I also feel happy that there is like possibility, because they're still thinking about it, so that's pretty cool. Looking specifically at Salamanders, is there any possibility that we might get them before some of the less popular factions? The reason I asked this is because on the faction survey, after Blood Angels, Salamanders were the second most popular Space Marine chapter. They gave a very short answer. It says, see answer above. Now, I think this is a very important part, and I keep saying this, but I do genuinely believe there are very important parts. And the video is actually different because it took me so long to make it because of my sickness. Now, what do I mean by this? It says, see answer above. If I made this video on January 1st, what this see answer above would relate to would be, we know some sub-factions like the additional Space Marine chapters also have a large number of fans, but doing one of them means doing all of them. So we are still thinking about how to best represent them, right? That's what it refers to. However, the fact that I waited to make this video changes what the answer means. Why do I mean this? Perhaps getting sick was good, and okay, it's of course no. Almost dying is a bad thing, okay? Hot take. No, what do I mean by this? Warhammer community released a new Codex roadmap. This roadmap includes an image of Salamanders, which appears to be getting a Codex, which means by Snowprint's own criteria, we might see Salamanders in the game. Remember, this is a Codex roadmap. Eldari have a Codex, they're getting a Codex. Astra Militarum is getting a Codex. Empress Children are getting a Codex. World Leaders, Death Guard, Thousand Suns have historically had Codexes, they are getting 10th edition Codexes. This image in my video, I don't know if I uploaded this video about this, but I'll just go over it quickly. This image is a Grey Knights image. Grey Knights have had codexes before, and they will get a codex towards the end of 2025. This image is very clearly a Black Templar's axe with chain to the wrist, right, representing Sigismund and how he does it. So this is a codex. They've had codexes. They are getting codexes. They are a faction in Tacticus already. This is Chaos Knights. We're not going to get them, unfortunately. However, they are a faction with a codex. Now, looking at all of this, the fact that there is a Space Marine with flames on his armor, with 2 Drake heads, and a Drake pelt neck guard, this is undeniably a Salamander. Now, why would Games Workshop put an image of a Salamander on a Codex roadmap? I think 2 + 2 is very simple. We are getting a Salamander Codex at some point in 2025 or early 2026. And the fact that this is happening actually changes the answer, because see the answer below, it becomes, yes, our priority is to bring in all factions that have a codex, with the exception of Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights, since they're not suitable for playable characters. So, if, or not if, when Salamanders get their codex, they will be eligible to meet this criteria. They will be included in all factions that have the codex. Now, is this confirmed? No. But taking this statement and this statement with the newfound context, I think it's pretty straightforward. Next question. What is the biggest playable character we can possibly get to play in Tacticus? Size-wise, how much chunk are you willing to fit into one hex? The reason I ask this is because there are certain characters, such as Revas, Aleph Null, Snap Aquila, and what's his name? Abaddon the Despoiler, who are actually very big characters when it comes to base sizes in tabletop. The answer I was given, we are roughly staying in the bounds of the infantry keyword of the tabletop, with some exceptions like crisis battlesuits defining the upper limit. This, I'm just going to stop here, and I don't want to take this out of context. I think the reason this is the case is because crisis battlesuits actually used to not be vehicles. They used to have a different keyword. They used to have the battlesuit keyword. So them being vehicles is like a thing that happened afterwards, which is funny. Larger or longer units like dreadnoughts or bikes will need to be distorted too much to fit into one hex. So we rather look for other opportunities to add them to game, like machines of war or guild bosses. Now, guild bosses, I don't... it's kind of like, okay, because we can't play guild bosses, of course. So the machine of war, it doesn't really fit into the hex, but what I'm... Oh yeah, also the note. Note, Aleph Null was an early day outlier of this. Nowadays, he would rather be a machine of war, which is a very interesting statement. What I'm understanding from this is that infantry is where it's at, and some, maybe not 10th edition infantry, but 9th and 8th edition infantry, such as the crisis battlesuits. I do like to have it clarified. Personally, I would have thought that certain units could break the mold, because if you're going by base size alone, a Hive Tyrant is appropriate sized. However, by the limitation of infantry, that will never happen. However, it seems that infantry is the new approach that they mentioned, because remember, they did literally say Aleph Null was an early day outlier. If he were added right now, he will be a machine of war, which is a crazy statement, I think. Next question. I feel like this was a weak question. With the increased popularity of 40k and thus Tacticus, there's an influx of new players coming to the game, making the new player experience extremely important. However, people who might like a model or character from tabletop often find that they do not have a direct way to unlock their preferred character. So what are your plans to address this in the future? The reason I say this is a weak question is because I said, what are your plans? Instead, I should have asked is, do you have plans to address this? Because then the answer will be more clarifying. Because they say, you will see soon, smiley face. So it might be like a very small change, like, oh, here's a mission chain that unlocks a character from this faction, where that technically addresses the issue. I choose to be positive. I choose to be excited about this. I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry. Are you surprised by how the community ends up using characters or approaches guild raid bosses? Nowadays, nearly all characters are used as we imagine them, which is mainly due to the valuable feedback we get from our testers and community ambassadors. I am not an ambassador, which is sad. That said, we do, of course, not get everything perfect, and sometimes some characters are a bit over or undertuned. My personal opinion, if I might interject, Patromine is undertuned, which then needs addressing after we gathered enough data and opinions from the live game. I don't think this was my best question. I do appreciate the answer, though. I think this was like a horrible question. I think I wasted a question here. Was there a character that really shocked you when it hit the live servers? Where the players started using it in a way you think it will be? My grammar is so poor, it is actually jarring. Goodness. Anyways, I essentially asked, like, oh, players started using it, were you shocked? The answer is, not really shocked, but some of the early characters like Eldrion or Aleph Null surprised us with the extent that they are used and contributed to our learnings. And while we knew what Ragnar would do, we underestimated his impact. Now, this is a very interesting statement. I don't want to take it out of context, so I put the whole answer, but I did highlight some things. So 2 parts that seem to pop out to me is, like Eldrion or Aleph Null surprised us with the extent they are used. And then the second one, we knew what Ragnar would do, we underestimated his impact. So I'm wondering, based on these statements, if the multi-hit meta was even intentional, or was it simply a byproduct of how the game's core systems work, that being how buffs interact with hits? Because you would think that when they made Eldrion, they will be like, hey, this gives damage per hit, so if people spam hits, they're gonna get a lot of damage. Similarly with Ragnar Blackmane. Now, I do not want to put words in their mouth. It's just an interesting thought chain, in my opinion, that maybe the multi-hit meta is not intentional. Maybe it's just simply a byproduct of how the game works. With the release of Titus, Tacticus has a faction with 6 playable characters. Can we expect this to set a new precedent for factions having more than 5 characters, not counting Machines of War, of course? Answer: since we hope that Tacticus will continue to make players happy for several years, we will likely tap into more characters for each faction, especially when there are good opportunities to sync with the wider Warhammer universe. Though currently our focus is to bring in all Codex factions. Once again, all Codex factions is supported. This question is a little outdated because I did put the questions in quite early, and by the time I got the answers, Nandi had made his video where he announced, like, oh my god, Farsight is gonna come, and Farsight is, of course, will be the 6th Tau character and whatnot. So it's very interesting to see. Last question, and this one, I am very underwhelmed by this question. Neurothrope is my favorite character, and I must ask these questions. Any hope for his passive cap to be increased or removed? Is the Vitruvius passive cap is the Vitruvius passive capped because it would break Neuro? Is there any hope for Vitruvius's passive cap to be removed? That's like me just trying to worm my way into a Neuro buff. When making new psychic and suppressive characters, do you think about, will this break Neuro? It's a long answer, so bear with me. Let us answer this on a bit higher level to stand in for other people's favorite characters, which is a very good way they handled the question, so kudos to them. Meta adjustments and reworks in the game, where players spend a lot of time and sometimes money into their collection, are complex and need time for our small team. Of course, until this part, like, this is a very perfectly sane statement to be like, hey, it takes a lot of time and effort to give characters, like, level up characters, and if you spend money on a character and we proceed to nerf them, it's gonna feel bad because you spent time, effort, and money on this character. So we have to be very nuanced in the way we do things. I do really appreciate this. Like, this is a very good way to approach the game. I love this. Mad respect to Snowprint. First, the feedback has to reach us. Then we need to try and make a plan that does not alienate our players and create new problems. Then we need time in the roadmap to execute it, and additional time until all puzzle pieces are released for players to play with. My understanding of this part is alienating players, because for the longest time, people have complained about Ragnar Blackmane Double Howl being overpowered in Tournament Arena. If Snowprint came out and nerfed Double Howl in any way, shape, or form, it would completely ruin any guild raid experience players might have, which would create absolute chaos. So once again, it is extremely good that Snowprint is cognizant of this. And once again, massive credit and shout out to them. Like, this whole paragraph gives me so much hope and makes me confident that Snowprint is not one of these slop developers like Bungie, like Blizzard, like other game developers, where they're like, oh yeah, let's just nerf this. If players don't like it, who cares? Like, this is a good thing. And unfortunately, it is also possible that sometimes we miss the mark. I think the mark was missed when they gave Fate's Remind 4 movement and no extra hits. Oh, despite our best efforts, sorry, I didn't read that, I apologize. Specifically for Neurothrope, we see Neurothrope as one cornerstone of the guild raid team builds and would like to keep it viable. Also, yes, the passive ability is something we have to consider when creating or updating characters. So, two things. This was a silly question. I shouldn't have even asked this. Like, of course they consider it. They're not stupid. However, one thing I dislike about this answer is how they consider the Neurothrope. We see the Neurothrope as one cornerstone of the guild raid team builds and would like to keep it viable. Of course, they're going to see the Neurothrope as a cornerstone of the guild raid teams because there are literally 3 viable guild raid teams: Neurothrope, multi-hit, and mechanical. And would like to keep it viable. With all due respect, and I say this with infinite respect and unending appreciation of them even doing this, Neurothrope is struggling so hard. It's the 3rd best team because there are only 3 teams. It's like saying, oh, I got 3rd in the competition, and someone asks, oh, how many people competed? And you say, oh, 3 people. So you came in last. I don't want to say this, but like, do we have to complain? Like, this is such an evil way to think about this, and I feel like I'm gonna have to end the video in an evil way, which is bad. First, the feedback has to reach us. Then we need to try to make a plan that doesn't alienate our players or create new problems. Then we need time in the roadmap to execute it, and additional time until all puzzle pieces are released for players to play with. We see Neurothrope as a cornerstone of Guild Raid teams' builds, and would like to keep it viable. What I understand from this is that there's an understanding that the Neurothrope team is viable, where it simply is not viable. And I think this understanding stems from the fact that most of the community, not most, okay, let's not say most, a large percentage of the community thinks that Neurothrope is viable when it simply is not when you compare him to Ragnar Blackmane comps and Eggstor Row comps. So, and I asked this as a question, is the answer to just not complain, but give feedback that, hey, Neurothrope is weak, it needs some sort of adjustment? Is that the answer? Is that what you're supposed to do? I don't know. It's a very silly way to end the video. I want to thank Snowprint so much for agreeing to do this. I want to thank Ratatosk, for giving me all the answers in written form when I was in the hospital. She could have very easily said, hey Draupnir, you missed your chance, you're not getting the interview. And that could have happened, but it didn't. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Ratatosk and Snowprint Game Studios for making this video possible. When I started this channel 8 months ago, I did not think I would ever get the opportunity to ask the developers of the game I like directly questions, and they would respond. So I am extremely grateful that they made this video possible. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Additionally, I want to thank all of you for watching my videos, for giving me a platform to ask these questions and to get them answered. Because if nobody watched my videos, if nobody subscribed, I wouldn't be able, I wouldn't even be on Snowprint's radar. So I really appreciate all of you. And I want to thank all of you for bearing with me, for not jumping ship when I was sick, when I was in the hospital, when I couldn't make content. We gained subscribers when I was gone, which raised the questions like, should I keep getting such? Anyways, I am losing my voice. This was a longer video. Thank you very much. Have a good day and stay safe.